of drafting, of coming up with the first draft. It's based on other board advisory committees. Also, keeping in mind the county's equity resolution, we're trying to use an equity lens to maybe through our recruitment and membership to sort of reduce some of the inequities that exist now. And then of course, direction from county council. Some of the areas that we are looking at, which I guess I should say right up front, we aren't flash cutting. I mean, this is going to be over a very long period of time as terms come up or depending on what's approved. But we are looking at membership terms. So like reducing or adding a term limit. That's in every version of the other county committees I looked at. They all had term limits. And one of the things that we'll do is help provide more opportunities for new membership. We're looking at designating a meeting each year for training and ongoing education. I heard that a lot, that I think staff's fallen a little short in that department. So if we're meaningful and provide you folks with a calendar and we can discuss it together and come up with the date that we think would be a good meeting for some additional training opportunities, we'd like to do that. We're thinking about the current public and industry membership configuration, whether it should be, whether we think it should continue to be 6 and 3, whether the committee should change its total membership, should we add more community members? Those are just sort of the broad categories. When we next meet, I hope to have a full proposal. You guys would get it a week before, and I would be very much interested in your response, your suggestions, and just sort of the feelings around what we're proposing. It's going to be a code change as well as the bylaws. A lot of the bylaws should look familiar. They might be rearranged and more readable. I got a lot of promulgates and like that in there. My goal in life to try and remove some of the legalese, but that's where we're at. And I didn't want to leave y'all hanging. So
are you targeting November? Are you targeting November for the?
I am, the next meeting, November 12th.
Okay. Sorry.
So Kathy, do we have people, public members clamoring to get members of the public clamoring to get on the board? Or when I got on the committee originally, I think we had 3 openings and there was just a lot of trouble finding people who were even willing to consider joining it. That's my question to you. The second question I have is for all the other members and for how long did first, do you feel like you're up to speed and pretty much competent to handle things as they come along, or do you still feel like you were thrown off the end of the pier and said you'll figure out how to swim pretty soon? And then secondly, how long do you feel it took you to get to the point where you're feeling comfortable that as issues came up, you had some background and you could, it wasn't a complete mystery to you what we were talking about?
So if you want me to, I'll answer the question about the recruitment. We haven't necessarily, the last recruitment, we had more applicants than available slots, which is a good sign. I think we haven't done a particularly good job in the past of really trying to get a broader recruitment, but that'll go with any proposal that increases positions. It's going to be up to us to really find those places where we can actively recruit, where maybe we haven't been before. So, on the one hand, we did get more applicants, and we really didn't try as hard as we could try, and we definitely will have to up our game going forward.
I think another important part of that, Ken, when we went from 10 a.m. on Thursday morning to 6 p.m. on Thursday evening. We got about 3 times as many applicants for the open positions as we had before.
That's really good information.
Big
Yeah.
change. Yeah.
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 So all the rest of you members, do any of you have any thoughts on how long it took you to come up to speed? Whatever up to speed is. This is the public members. I assume the industry members come in fully charged.
It took me at least a year. It took me at least a year, if not longer. And frankly, I'm still learning, and I've been on it 10 plus years, right? So
Well, yeah, but that's because you're a deep learner.
Yeah.
And
But
really
no,
dig into things.
it did take at least a year. Things have actually changed quite a bit since I first started too.
So one of my concerns about term limits has been, when I served previously on school boards, I think it was 2 full years before I felt I was starting to get my arms around the issues and pretty much knew what the variables were and what we had to do. That didn't mean I had an opinion yet. I just was knowing that that was an issue and that I needed to do some more homework. And my feeling for here is that since we typically have one meeting about every 3 or 4 months, it's at least a year before you've been through a full cycle. And is this something I should be thinking about or not? And if I am, what do I think? Kinds of issues for me. And I just wonder if that's the case for everyone else, because I think we should push back against term limits and say, if the term limit is only long enough for somebody to really get comfortable with what he's doing, and then we have to bring in a new person, that's quite dysfunctional for us on the public side. The industry members come in, as I said, fully conversant with the issues they've been dealing with SWAC and the county as either a supporter or a thorn in their side for as long as they've been in business. It's sort of like asking me, how do I feel about the FAA? Yes, I have opinions, but most people don't even know what the FAA is. And so if you bring somebody in out of the public to talk about airport policy or other policies, they're completely lost. And there's a lot of nuanced technology in there too. And there is here in solid waste. And it's not just a simple thing. So I think we need to make sure our term limits are realistic in terms of letting somebody come up to speed.
I would say that we recognize that. And so we're offering, we're thinking about a couple of different things. One is having at least one full meeting a year be nothing but training subjects, ongoing education subjects. Being intentional about it. We're also trying to hold a meeting almost every month. We missed the September one, but we had the hazardous events going on and things. But since Tom and I have been doing this, we've met every month the last 4 out of 5 times. So that's the other thing. And then one other thing I've thought about is some of the other committees for the county offer a pre-meeting meeting for public members that want to talk about issues that are going to be on the agenda to give background or, help that level of understanding, not to get your vote, not about that, but just to give some of the information, because it's really intimidating. Just the terminology sometimes. I'm still learning. I've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah, I have some ideas for you guys too. In this COVID world, we're all doing, this is being recorded. And like Kathy, you have sat me down a couple times and gone through the rate review process, right? You could record that and kind of as a training session.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And frankly, anybody in the county should be able to log on and watch it. This is what actually happens. This is how we do it.
Yeah,
it's good.
That's a good idea.
That is a good idea. Excellent idea.
Yeah, we've been talking about doing some more information, like almost like fact sheets about what's your garbage rate, how's it set, what is it, what part of it is paid for disposable, what part pays for the gas, what part pays for labor, what part pays for the truck, and kind of a little bit more.
That sounds like a great
along those lines.
infographic. I can just see the infographic now, right? And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I hear what you're saying, Ken. I think it's a very important point about confidence and ability to weigh in on subjects that are very detailed and nuanced. And I think that is a big responsibility of us as staff to make sure that we are educating the committee, especially, and becomes more important if there's more turnover and there's term limits. So I think it's incumbent upon us to hold our meetings every month. We say that we're going to do that when we recruit folks, and then we had, you know, like you said, 2 or 3 a year, and for the last several years, and I don't think that's doing anybody any service. So if we meet more regularly, we get to know each other better, we have a better rapport together, we talk about the issues more often. We offer community members the opportunity to chat with staff ahead of the meeting, to talk about the issues, what's coming up, some background topics, not make decisions, but have those conversations. I think those are all important pieces of it. And then just making sure that we acknowledge basically the power differential of knowledge in the room, and understand how that we can help elevate the voice of the community members, because our board's really interested in hearing what the community wants, what they think about these issues and these policies. I mean, if we're bringing a rate increase to the board, I'm pretty sure that they know the Hauler Association feels about it. They know what they know what the haulers like or want, and so they want to hear from the community members that are on these commissions to kind of talk about these issues. And they've looked at the details, they've looked under the hood, they're comfortable with it, they feel like it's a good proposal. So those are the kind of things.
And my discussions with county commissioners has been that their feeling is, after they've gotten elected, is they're like the dog that caught the car. What are we going to do now? Because and they really are drinking out of a fire hose to learn all the issues. We just deal with one little narrow area. They deal with everything in the county, and every hothead out there who's been trying to get something changed for 20 years is in their face trying to explain to them, the new guy, how it works or doesn't work.
We received some pretty specific guidance from our board about term limits too. They wanted 2 or 4 year terms and limits on those. And I think we're going to try to push for the longest we can go for. We're hoping for 4 year terms and at least 2 terms. So that's 8 years. And I think that's a pretty significant commitment and a lot of time for someone to gain knowledge and participate in the process. But I'm fully aware of what you're pointing out, Ken.
Okay.
And today it says you're appointed for 5, right? And you have to reapply. And frankly, too, there's some relief too as a public member with a term limit, because I'm past 10 years, and there's a part of me that would say, well, I get it, I've done my thing, I want to move on. But there's also a part of me that says, well, I should hang out. The county's invested, I should kind of stay here, right? So with a term limit, you don't have to really go through that process of feeling guilty about leaving.
We appreciate that you would feel guilty leaving us, Mike.
Definitely. And I would just make a plug for if any of you have any suggestions, this is a good time to shoot me an email, because my intention is to come to you at the next meeting with the bylaws as proposed. So things like recording training sessions, great idea. Yeah, so that would be really helpful. And it could just be a concept, doesn't have to be fleshed out, but just so something I might not have thought about.
Thank you. Have you covered administrative rules update, or is that indeed the next item?
That's a much broader topic. So,
what's next?
Ready?
So, yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. All right. So this is Kathy Folsom with Solid Waste and Recycling staff again. I'm here tonight to sort of give you a heads up about the next 12 months or so, where staff's going to be exploring several topics that might require updates to our rules or even new rules. Since we don't have franchise agreements with our service providers, our rules do establish the standards for all of the provisions contained within the Washington County Solid Waste Control Code. Some of the topics that we're intending to address over the next 12 months include implementing the Metro Code changes that Tom was talking about earlier, in particular for multifamily collection service. This would include standards for cart colors, the volume of service minimums, labeling of the containers and carts. Metro Code is out of date and it doesn't reflect the regional waste plan. Part of their efforts right now is, I think that their proposed rules are currently up for public comment through October 15th. Can correct me if I'm wrong. Once their rules have been finalized, we're going to draft rules to present to the committee and then ultimately to the board. Another one is the Metro's business food waste requirement implementation dates have been pushed back a whole year to March 2021. This has had the effect of making our solid waste and recycling rules obsolete. So we need to go in and fix that. We're going to be proposing rules to address the collection of personally identifiable information that's required by service providers to start or change collection service. As a result of a customer complaint, staff in conjunction with the City of Hillsborough investigated the types of information that is currently collected, and we found quite a variety of information that might be required, everything from a minimum of name and address to social security numbers and birth dates. In addition to addressing the types of information collected, we will also try to ensure that service providers have systems in place that will protect any sensitive information. And then another big area, as Tom mentioned, are inclement weather. We quickly learned as a result of the recent wildfire smoke event that they were way too narrowly defined. It specifically spoke to hazardous roads and school closures as indicators of valid miscollection. We'd like to broaden the rules to include other types of hazardous events, including hazardous air quality. Next steps, we'll be working closely with all interested parties, including the committee. After the meeting tonight, I'll send you all a link to our current rules if anyone wants to just take a look at what we have now. We will be working with the Washington County Hauler Association to explore both staff's rule proposals as well as whether they have any specific rules that they would like to have staff take a look at. In the past, we have both proposed our own rules as well as incorporated some of the hauler proposed rules. It's likely that a portion of these new rules will be in front of the committee for action in the first quarter of 2021. We have to fix those business food scrap states at a minimum before the end of March. And after that, we're intending to bring some additional proposed rule changes to the committee for review, probably in the second quarter or the summer. So there'll be a lot of opportunities. If there's anything that you've thought of that you'd like to know whether we've already addressed that or not, again, shoot me an email. But it was really just a chance to kind of tee it up for y'all and let you know that you're going to start to see administrative rules for your review. And it's been my experience in the past that oftentimes it takes a couple of committee meetings to reach a good conclusion because there's a lot of details that have to be worked out. The Hauler Association in the past has also had subcommittee just thoroughly dedicated to proposed rules. So it's an involved process, but it's really important, in particular, since we don't have franchise agreements. The board issues a certificate and it has a map attached, and that's the only thing that's granted by the board. So it's time. We haven't had a major overhaul in a few years, so it's going to be on my plate for a while, but I look forward to it. I think there's a lot of things that we can both improve as well as add to the rules that will help clarify and gain a clearer understanding of what the standards are that are expected by Washington County.
See, Beth has her hand up.
Thank you. It's funny, my hand isn't showing, but I'm glad somebody else saw it, even though I couldn't. So I just have a quick question because think it may be within the realm of expectation that the business food scraps may continue to be altered because of the economic situation. And I understand there's a tie there. So maybe Kathy, you could speak to that.
So my intention, I've already corrected that rule because it was an easy one, is to remove all references in our rules to dates and merely point to the Metro's rules and their standards. So whatever changes there will just change in our rules. So we're getting rid of, we'll still have the 3 groups that currently exist. We just won't have all those implementation dates, and that could quickly, as you point out, be out of date again.
Second time we've learned a lesson not to put hard dates in rules. Maybe the second time's you actually learn, right? Fool me twice, shame on me. So, any other questions about the rules project, the work? I mean, like Kathy said, I think it's we're gonna, as we get more to sharing proposed language, we'll probably pull out sections and topics and start shopping them and sharing them with you all as we share them with the Hauler Association, just so everyone can kind of start seeing where we're going and what we're thinking, and offering opportunities for feedback and comment. Okay, thank you. Oh, you're muted, Ken.
Now I'm unmuted. Now go over here and find.
Did he freeze?
I think Ken did freeze.
Yeah.
I think it
I think he's just sitting very still.
Give him a minute.
Did I tell you guys that last week we had parent-teacher meetings on Zoom, and then one of the parents said their kid already figured out how to use his picture as the screensaver, so he would take a picture of himself and then he was walking around.
That's amazing. My brother has a 4th grader, I think, and their teacher reached out to them and said, Luca's internet connection has a problem. They're like, what are you talking about? We have like gig speed internet. He's like, well, he tells us that the internet's frozen, and then he falls off the calls, but then he goes out and plays basketball and shoots hoops. So he's figured out a good strategy too.
Well, I'll just let you guys know, this isn't me. This is my artificial intelligence chat.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm off doing something else.
Well, there's no change, so it's
Right. It just mimics me. It's my.
Let's give Ken a minute to come back. And if we don't see him in a minute, I'll start the presentation. All right, I'll go ahead and throw out my screen share and get this started.
Oh,
I can barely read that.
So can you see it now?
there it is.
Yeah,
Now we can.
Okay. All right, so I'm looking at 2 screens here, so I apologize if I'm not looking at the camera. Why don't I go ahead and get started, and if Ken comes back in, we can take a quick pause. So the last item on our agenda this evening is to provide you all an update on a project that is being led by the Oregon DEQ and the Statewide Recycling Steering Committee. And the project Vinod is very familiar with because he's on the Statewide Steering Committee. Oh, there's Ken. Welcome back, Ken.
I don't know what happened. Zoom just dropped me. It took me forever to get back in. The miracles of modern technology. Go ahead, Tom.
Thanks, Ken. This legislative concept is coming out of the Recycling Steering Committee, a project led by the Oregon DEQ. And I'm going to go ahead and give you guys an update on the outcome and what the legislative proposal that's coming out of this work should look like going into the 21 legislative session. And then a little bit of a context from Washington County's perspective about where we think this aligns with our goals. And we're going to be sharing this with our Board of Commissioners on the 20th of this month to see if they are interested in putting this on a legislative priority list for our government affairs team to work in Salem. So let's start with a need for the need for a modern recycling system. As everyone on this committee really knows, Oregon's system really has heavily relied on global recycling markets, historically been dominated by China. As you all recall, we had some recycling market disruptions in 2013, Operation Green Fence. I love China's, what they call their recycling cleanup operations. So they had Operation Green Fence in 2013 that caused a stir, a blip on the recycling markets, and it put some challenges on markets and raised costs for recycling. And then in 2018-19, we had Operation National Sword, which was the big one. And that really was China telling the West they don't want their recycling or their garbage anymore. That pretty much meant that shipping materials to China was no longer an option. Vinod probably knows these numbers better, but I think that somewhere up to 60% of the world's plastic was heading to China for recycling. Most of the recycling on the West Coast was going to China because we are near big ports receiving goods from China, and those ships are returning empty. So containers being shipped back to China full of recycling was really cheap, and the markets were hungry for the material. And so that's pretty much where everything was going. And we had this pretty much abrupt end in 2018-19. You would recall we put a recycling processing fee on our rates because the system went upside down. We were no longer receiving money for recyclables. We were paying for them as a system. So the ratepayers were actually paying to dump recycling. And at some point, it was more expensive to get rid of recycling than garbage. I mean, it's still up there around those same cost differentials. So there's clearly a problem in the recycling markets, the global markets, that needs to be addressed. Another need for changing and modernizing the system is we really have a different mixed recycling stream than we had when we created our recycling programs, when the regional recycling facilities were stood up and built. We have a lot less paper in our mix now than we did before. We have a lot more mixed plastics. A lot of the recycling facilities in the region were built to recycle newsprint, to sort newspaper, and that was 70% of the mix when those facilities were put in place. Now we're looking at paper being a pretty small portion of the mix, and these plastics are hitting the markets that are really strange and odd, and every one of them has a chasing arrows. I see Vinod has.
Well, paper is still the largest part of the mix, but it's mixed paper. It's not newspaper.
Mixed paper. Okay.
Yeah, that's the difference. So it's about 80%.
But how much?
Well, it's almost 80-90% if you add the cardboard back in.
Okay.
So mix is about 70%. Cardboard's around 20, and then you have all the other stuff.
Okay. So the mix is changing. Another result of, I think, our reliance as the West Coast on international markets and global markets is a lot of our domestic recycling capacity has closed and gone away. A lot of the recycling mills, paper mills on the West Coast have closed down. Blue Heron was a big one in Oregon City, and there was an SP newsprint down in Newburgh. Those facilities are no longer there, and they're no longer options or opportunities for us to recycle domestically here. So we've lost domestic capacity in the last couple decades. And really, because of all of these changes in the system, we're seeing much higher collection rates and processing fees that are being passed on to community members. So if the garbage haulers are collecting recycling and they're delivering it to a materials recovery facility and they're being charged for that, that cost is going to be passed on to the ratepayer because that's how the system's set up. So at this point in time, all of the risk essentially in the system is put onto the ratepayers in terms of making sure that the recycling system is stood up and is able to maintain itself. And then there's lots of consumer confusion about the recyclability of packaging. I mentioned earlier a bunch of new plastics and packaging designs hitting the market. Every one of them has a chasing arrow symbol on the bottom of it. There's a lot of information out there that community members seem to think everything that's plastic is recyclable. And we've seen some media recently about the plastics industry purposely deceiving consumers to make them believe that plastics are all recyclable. So it's not on accident, and it's kind of building into a crisis now where we're dealing with lots of waste materials in our recycling streams and having difficulty finding places to recycle it. So that's kind of sets the stage of why we need to do something to modernize our system. So to work towards seeking a proposal, the state DQ brought together a recycling steering committee about 2 years ago. They formed a committee. Sitting on that committee is the Department of Environmental Quality, so the state DEQ, Association of Oregon Recyclers, Recycling Partnership, which is a national recycling organization, NORPAC Paper and Denton Plastics, which are manufacturers and recyclers, League of Oregon Cities and the Association of Oregon Counties, which are local government lobby associations, City of Portland, Metro, Lane County, local governments, and then we had the Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association, EFI Recycling and Far West Recycling sitting on the committee, and then the collection industry was Waste Management, Republic Services, and Road Disposal. So it was a large group of industry members came together to try to come up with a solution to come together and reach consensus on a proposal that they would support going into the legislative session. Their last meeting was on September 18th of this last month, and they did reach a consensus on a proposal. I think it was a pretty overwhelming consensus. It was based on a 0 to 5 scale, and most of the, I think, members voted in pretty strong favor of that final outcome. So that's a good outcome. In kind of helping craft the framework for what was going to be in the proposal, early on the steering committee created a vision for what they wanted out of a new modern recycling system. They wanted to create a system that reduces waste and uses fewer resources, ensures clean materials are recycled responsibly. I think this is a really important one. Making sure that when we do capture materials for recycling, we're making sure that they actually get recycled. They're not ending up in overseas markets that are irresponsible or don't have proper environmental regulations to ensure that they're being handled responsibly. A system that is resilient and can adapt to change. That kind of speaks to the change we've experienced over the last couple of decades. A system that's transparent and accountable to communities. We want to make sure that we can prove to and tell our community members that the good things are happening with the materials that they sort and put in the bin. It's not just for they're doing it for a reason. We want to make sure that it provides convenient and equitable access to communities. We want to make sure it supports safe and living wage jobs. It advances economic opportunity and equity in the system, and it has stable financing. This is a really important piece. So this was the vision that the committee worked for several years to come together and create a proposal. So the next several slides are pretty dense and lots of words and colors, but I'll kind of work through it. The final proposal came out with 10 highlighted points, I would say. This is basically was crafted in a document that would act as a guide for the state DQ to work with some legislative affairs folks to draft the legislative concept. So at this point, this is just an overview document saying this is what we want to see in legislation, and DQ is going to work over the next several months to actually draft that legislation and share it with the stakeholders. So starting in the beginning, one of the first things the committee wanted to see was a truth in labeling. And this really speaks to reducing public confusion about what materials are recyclable and how they're labeled in Oregon. So this would require producers that sell products into Oregon to actually make sure that those products that are labeled as recyclable are recyclable in Oregon. So talking about those chasing arrow symbols on all these containers that are not actually accepted as recycling in our state. This would be a new requirement on manufacturers to ensure that if you're going to sell a product in Oregon and you put the recycling symbol on it, it needs to be accepted in our system.
So,
go ahead.
Tom, is there any effort to provide some kind of source of information for what to do with something that is not recyclable in Oregon? That's something that the recycling people don't accept. The current conventional wisdom is you just put it in the garbage and let it go to the landfill. And I don't know if that's the best answer.
Yeah, I think that is the best answer, Ken. And I think historically we've avoided trying to say that because we want to encourage as much recycling as we can. But I think we need to make a little bit of a pivot as an education industry and as an industry in general to not vilify the landfill. It's not a big evil place. If it's not recyclable, that's where it should be. It's better to be in a landfill here in Oregon that's managed responsibly than an open landfill in Southeast Asia or another country that can't manage it. So I think we need to adjust our lens a little bit and not make people scared of the garbage can. The second point on the proposal is a statewide collection list, and this plays into the truth in labeling too. So this helps let manufacturers and producers know what is recyclable in Oregon. So this legislation would create a recycling list that is consistent across the state. Right now in the metro region, we have the same recycling list as all of the metro region, and it's stayed held together, but there's other parts of the states that have a little bit different lists. They don't accept tubs in Mid-Valley. They don't accept some other materials in Southern Oregon. So part of this would create a list, one statewide list. It doesn't mean it's our list. It doesn't mean it's the current list in the metro region, but it would be one list across the state that would be agreed upon. And there would be a clear process to add or remove items to that list that considers the environmental benefits and burdens of recycling those materials. Another point would be reducing contamination in recycling, which has been an issue in quality of the material. We would see some statewide contamination reduction goals that would be set by the state and the producers. They would include feedback to recyclers in all sectors, including single family, multifamily, commercial, and that contamination feedback would be funded by producers in a way to help pay for the costs of reducing contamination. Another aspect would be transparency and accountability. As I mentioned in the visions, there would be some new requirements that demonstrate that materials are recycled responsibly. So there would be some chain of custody that would have to prove that when we put these materials into the recycling system, we know where they're going, and they're going to responsible recyclers, and they're getting turned into new products. We don't lose track of them once they go overseas or go to irresponsible markets, potentially. And we want to make sure that when those materials are collected for recycling, they are not resulting in negative impacts on humans and the environment further downstream. The fifth part is processing and marketing standards. This would ensure that the materials that are sorted are appropriately handled responsibly, and they meet the expectations of the community. This would be a standard on the recycling facilities to say that these are the sort specs that the markets demand, and so these are the specs that the recyclers need to sort to, and there's some standards in that space. 6, would have equity standards in the proposal that would support expanded access to recycling collection for multifamily and rural communities. So currently, all recycling in Oregon is shipped to the metro region, essentially. So when the recycling is collected in Bend or Medford, those materials are collected by haulers, taken to a transfer station, loaded onto trucks, and trucked up to Oregon. That costs money, so this system would help offset those transportation costs to ensure that rural communities have equal access to recycling that the urban communities do, so that we can kind of balance that economic scale. Also, multifamily programs, it would require provisions to help support increasing recycling opportunities in multifamily communities, helping pay for infrastructure improvements, container improvements, enclosure improvements to make sure that people that live in multifamily communities have access to recycling as well. There would be safe living wage job requirements and worker advancement requirements. There would be advanced economic opportunities for Oregon businesses and businesses owned by women and people of color for bidding and contracts. And there would be some insurance that end markets are not burdening communities with land, air, water pollution. So this speaks back to the responsible markets point. 7, there would be an agreement that there would be advocacy to expand the bottle bill to include wine and spirits in the bottle bill. Those are some of the only beverage containers that are glass that are currently not included in the bottle bill. Glass is a pretty frequent contaminant in recycling streams, and there's a sense that if those materials were redeemable and had a deposit, that they would not end up in the mixed recycling as often. There would be a statewide education campaign. Local governments would remain and retain the responsibility for local education programs, like what we conduct in our division. But the there would be a statewide education program and campaign that would create materials that are consistent across the state, that would have templates that local governments could borrow and use to ensure that education is consistent on the recycling lists. There would also be minimum standards for certain percentage of recycled plastics or paper products that are sold in packaging in Oregon. So if you're going to sell packaging in Oregon, like a paperboard box, it would have to be a certain percent recycled content to be sold in Oregon. And the last part of this really is an extended producer responsibility lens. This whole bill could be considered an EPR bill, but it's also got more than EPR. And EPR really means that producers have some responsibility for the materials that they create and produce. So producers are required under this, would be required under this legislation to be part of what they call a producer responsibility organization. So they would have to form an organization, and they would collect what they call eco-modulated fees, which is a fancy word, which I will try to help describe in a second, for materials that are sold into Oregon. And those fee structures would help incentivize environmentally responsible packaging. So essentially the concept behind eco-modulation is if a manufacturer is selling a product in Oregon, they're gonna pay a fee to the producer responsibility organization to help manage that product after it's thrown in the garbage or recycling. If a producer A and producer B are both selling the same or similar product into Oregon, and one of those products has a larger environmental footprint than the other, the producer who sells the product that has a larger environmental footprint will pay more than the producer that sells the product that is more sustainable. So this gives an economic signal to producers to say, if I create more sustainable packaging, I pay less into having to pay for managing those products at the end of life. So it provides environmental economic signals to improve packaging and the environmental footprint those packaging would carry. Part of this EPR proposal includes funding. So the producer responsibility organization, and in turn the manufacturers. So at this point, we're talking about the Unilevers, the Nabiscos, the Kellogg's, those big producers of products and packaging. Would pay for improvements. They would pay for the transportation costs to move materials from rural markets to urban markets. They would pay for processing equipment improvements. So if the MRF standards are improving and we need to sort to cleaner specs, they would help fund improvements to clean and sort that material better. They would pay for contamination reduction, messaging and campaigns and work, and they would pay for more equitable access to recycling in multifamily and, as I mentioned, rural communities. The PROs, in order to do this work, they would be required to submit annual stewardship plans to the state DEQ. The DEQ would work with a review committee to review the plans and approve them. Local collection would remain the way it is today. So the local regulatory system that we oversee in Washington County would not change. Current franchising and collection would be unaffected, so we would still have local haulers under local agreements collecting recycling and garbage as they do today. There would be a standard statewide list, as I mentioned earlier. We would expect consumer impact to mean that there would be less of a cost burden or less cost increases as the system improves on collection customers. And in terms of who's paying for the improvements, the industry, the producer industry has a very large customer base. So those costs, we know when money flows into a system, it comes from somewhere. Those costs are paid from somewhere. And if it's the packaging and paper industry, those costs are spread out over a global customer base and not just the ratepayers at the curb for the garbage service. The system would also potentially enable some additional funding and opportunities for depots for hard to recycle items like styrofoams and other special plastics, and also plastics litter reduction campaigns to reduce environmental microplastic contamination and other plastic impacts. So how does this proposal align with our interests in Washington County? We kind of are crosswalking this a little bit to talk with our Board of Commissioners. I got on the left side the green, yellow, green. Green means fully, yellow means mostly, and there's no other colors on there. So I think it shows that it's mostly aligns with what we identify as our interests. I think our top priority in my mind is that we as a local government are ensuring that the materials we collect for recycling are recycled. We don't want to be in the business of deceiving our community members into participating in a system that is not actually doing what it's being sold to do. So I think most everybody that recycles in Oregon is recycling because they believe in it and they believe that it produces an environmental benefit and it's the right thing to do. And it's important for us to make sure that that is actually the outcome of participating in a recycling program. So that's our #1 priority, I think, in terms of this proposal. Producing equity outcomes throughout the system. I think there's a lot of movement here. This is a really good thing. The only reason this is yellow is I think it's focused on certain sectors, and I think it's more focused on the processing and sorting sector and less on the other sectors, less on local governments and less on the collection industry. Minimizing financial burden placed on ratepayers. This is another one where I can't give it a full green because we would, as local governments, we'd like to see industry maybe have a little bit more skin in the game in terms of the collection system. We think that some EPR programs have a cost share model with industry to say, hey, you need to help us pay for picking the stuff off the curb too. This current model leaves collection the way it is so that the cost of collecting materials from the curb is all on the ratepayers in this system as well. Another part of this could be, there's some models that reduce the cost of, or ensure a low cost of getting rid of your recycling or taking it to the MRF, a zero gate fee or whatever. This system wouldn't guarantee that as well. We do believe it would reduce public confusion about recycling with consistent education campaigns and truth and labeling. We believe it would stabilize and enhance recycling programs, bring in industry and the producers into the picture, would make sure that we have more stakeholders and more resources to stabilize and ensure that our programs are performing and continue to perform. It would maintain local control over the collection system for local collection. We believe that's a strong priority for the county. And ultimately, for the bottom line of the county, because collection is not affected, it would not impact revenues received by the county through franchise fees or any other means. So where's it go from here? This is a legislative priority for the DEQ. This is going to be their top priority, I think, going into the 21 session. I was talking with our lobbyist and DEQ's folks the other day and asking about what do they think how do they feel this is, what's the appetite in the legislature to do this in next session, considering all the things that are happening in our society right now. I think it's a wild card. It's a good question. There's some signals we saw that the Democratic caucus is not going to reintroduce cap and trade in 21, which basically blew up the last two legislative sessions. So I think that is a positive thing for this bill. We're not expecting we're not aware of any other large environmental initiatives that might come and take the spotlight on this topic in the legislature. There was a lot of fear the last month or two that the session, next session would be dominated by budgets and slashing budgets for state agencies based on the recession from COVID. There was actually a surprisingly rosy economic forecast that came out about 2 weeks ago that said, hey, it's not looking as bad as it could have been in terms of the revenue income at the state. So I think that might signal that the legislative session will be less about slashing budgets and more about doing business and helping move through recovery for the state of Oregon. So DEQ is looking for stakeholders to help work the bill and looking for support in Salem for organizations like Washington County. So we're going to be shopping this with our commissioners later this month, and our government affairs team is prepared to help work on it. I know Metro is eager to work on this, and there's several area local governments that are also really interested in this work. So that's what I got. Thank you. I'm going to stop screen sharing so we can talk about it and ask any questions. A lot of information. So
a lot of information. I'm heartened to see them working to go back to the manufacturers and everything. We have allowed the oil industry in particular, but oil and packaging industry to move forward with what was essentially throwaway packaging. It's not necessary. It's not used in all the rest of the world, and I think we ought to be working. Germany, as I understand it, has a program that says you can't put it into the stream. You have to take it back and figure out what to do with it yourselves, and which immediately stopped a whole bunch of co-plastic things where they had multi-layer things of plastics, which were not compatible with anybody's single program, and there was no way to separate them out. And so when you put the expense back on the manufacturer and say, well, at the end of the day, when the car dismantler takes it apart, he ships you all this stuff that he doesn't know what else to do with, and you have to buy it back. It changed the program immensely, and I would like us to see us go to. So I'm really happy about the paper bag bill, or the whatever they call it, that you can't use free paper bags at grocery stores anymore. I see a difference in the people carrying bags into the store every day. So I think, you know, we need to encourage the front end of the stream as much as we can to stop putting so much stuff into the stream and getting it back. And I think the same thing. How are they going to handle small packagers who aren't Unilever or Coca-Cola or somebody, but some little brewery in Germany that's selling, you know, 300 cases into Oregon? That's their total sales. Does that get handled by the distributor importer here as a fee if he's got sort of some kind of foam sleeve around the outside of the bottle and it's not recycled? How are we handling the smaller generators?
Rob, do you want to?
Yeah, I think I believe that there's, you know, the intention is that there'll be a threshold. So if you're a really small company producing something in Portland, you may not have to pay into that because you're not putting enough material into the system. So there's this package, although there's a real lot there, there's a lot more to come. This was
okay.
Yeah, I mean, this getting to here was a lot of work, and I would say that I was talking to somebody that was on the committee, and this was truly consensus. I don't think anybody walked out of there with everything they wanted. Everybody said, hey, this is where we can live with. This is what's fair. You know, maybe it's not what I would put, but then, you know, everybody had to give up something. So as far as the consensus program went, I think it was pretty good.
And time is on our side. You know, if they don't get it done this next year, they can get it done 2 years, 5 years, just so eventually we move to the point where we've got our producing streams and our dealing with it streams more or less equal and back to able to balance quite nicely.
Yeah, that's really, you know, talking about what goes into the stream and what's marketable and what you do with those other materials is the criteria to put something into the curb means that it's got somewhere to go.
That's right.
All this wishful recycling and the items that really got lost in the system were stuff that wasn't supposed to be in there in the first place. And so when market said, oh, we'll take that too, then like, okay, if you want it, then, you know, if you're going to buy it from us, then fine. But then, you know, hindsight, we, you know,
yeah.
But we're going somewhere better now, definitely. So.
Any other questions?
So everything that's recycling right now that we put in our recycle bins, there is a market for that, and they are being recycled.
Most of it is, yeah.
Yeah, if it's supposed to be in there, you know, and what's really changed is you know, the mixed paper that was exported, most of that's going, you know, 50 miles north or it's staying domestic. A lot of the plastics, you know, PET water bottles, HDPE bottles, those always had good homes. So the stuff that had shaky homes was the clamshells and all these other things that end up in there. So that's the important part of making sure the list is right, so that, you know, it's based first on, does it have a stable market somewhere to go to, and then you put it up against all the other criteria. So
Sandra, I think it's Sandra, I think it's fair to point out that at the end of the Murphing string, where they've pulled out everything that they think they can get rid of in some positive way, it goes to the landfill, and they have a percentage of how much material that goes through the MRF that's got to not go to landfill. I mean, they've got something, I forget what it is, 80% has to be recoverable out of the stream as they MRF it. But the fact is that stuff that gets put in there that shouldn't be in there goes right on through and out to the landfill.
Yeah, diapers, garbage, batteries, all these things that are being thrown in there, they're not supposed to be in there, and they're going to the landfill. So.
Yeah. And the truth is, right, this fixes a really big problem, but we still have one existing problem that Ken kind of touched on, which is they're still making too much plastic.
Yeah.
That's enough. That's probably, to me, it's still the bigger fight that we got. But for our business, right? I mean, how long did you guys work on this? 2.5 years, Vinod, to come up with what Tom just covered in 30 minutes?
It took about a year to get momentum. There was a lot of talking about getting going, and then once it got going, the last 2-3 months have just been, when COVID hit, it got more. It was meeting after meeting. I mean, 6-hour Zoom meetings and meetings after the meetings, and there was so much going on in subcommittees. I think they quoted 100 meetings, but a lot of it happened in like the last 6 months. It was a real.
And if you look at it from a sociological or political science kind of point of view, just getting the American people, the overall consensus of what the conventional wisdom is now. For a long time, the factory felt that once it went out of their door, they didn't have any responsibility at all. They shouldn't be told what they had to do or anything else. They built a great car, or a great package of something or whatever. That's somebody else's problem down the road. And we finally are getting the people starting to look, people in positions of authority starting to look at the whole stream. And, gosh, if we plug the hole up here at the front of the stream, we won't have to ever deal with this again. And that's the way we ought to be dealing with things. Like, there's no problem with carrying your grocery bag to the grocery store. And we're finding that's the case. So,
yeah, I think the whole thing was always built as a house of cards. I think that, this idea that recycling paid for itself was never true. And at the end, with China backing out, necessity is the mother of all invention, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because things that we should have been doing. I mean, this is getting us back to hopefully doing more, as Vinod was saying, a little bit more domestic investment, which would be.
Yeah, I mean, for years, the commodity values hid the processing costs. And so when the commodity value went away, it showed, oh yeah, these machines cost millions of dollars. Oh, we have employees. Oh, we have all these trucks and equipment.
And Vinod has to make $1 million a year. I mean,
hey, I drive a 2002 Chevy, so I'm breaking it in. Hey, I think Tom touched on it too. That if you guys watched that frontline piece, when they first started that, they wanted to see where our plastics were going, and we said, yeah, we'll do it, and that was about the same time it was all crashing, and we said, you know what, we don't export this stuff anymore because it's garbage, and we know it's garbage. So you can come look at the bales as we head them over to the landfill down the street. You can follow them there. It's not that exciting of a trip though. You're not going across the ocean to do it. So that's when that story changed from what's happening to recycling to what the plastic industry has been doing since the 70s with their cab commercials and things like that. So it's interesting days ahead, definitely.
Yeah, and I think one of the more exciting parts, one of the really exciting parts about it too, and I think one of the really future looking is starting to introduce that eco-modulation concept. And so really looking at materials and sending economic signals to businesses that are economic beasts that say that, hey, if you clean up your packaging, you pay less to play in the system in Oregon. And that's I think that's a model that's being used in France, and it's been successful at getting more sustainable products on shelves. And I think that's really an exciting piece of this proposal.
I would like to see more companies that can take this recycled material and make new products out of it. And I hope that Oregon's encouraging that as well. I didn't really see that much in your presentation. I mean, it's one thing to fine the people or charge fees at the front end, but if we can create more of a jobs and more of a use for these products that people are throwing away or end up in the landfill, that'd be even better.
And I think part of that, like what Denton Plastics is one of those companies that is a local recycling manufacturer. They create, plastic raw material, resin products, and that's a good example. And it all plays together. If we recycle better, if we have easier things to identify that's recyclable, it's easier for the consumer to sort it out. It's easier for the MRF to sort it out and into cleaner bales. And if the bales are cleaner, it's cheaper for the domestic mills and the domestic markets to take them and make new products out of them. So it's all connected. It's all one big piece, one big puzzle.
I mean, a company like Agilix that can take styrofoam. I mean, we need more of those companies to take all the styrofoam that's out there.
And we need a taxing structure or something equivalent to allow a company like Agilix, whatever, with their styrofoam, because they end up with pure liquid styrene and a totally marketable product, but
It
it
makes more of
doesn't.
the stuff that nobody wants.
Well, there is that, but that said,
So,
we need to be able to
I
fund
just hate
people.
driving around with it.
I understand, but I think that it's important that to the point where it's diseconomic by just a little bit. The fee that we charge at the front end should help pay for the cost of bringing it back to being a marketable, consumable product.
so I just want to, if it's all right, jump in here and say that, you know, we do say reduce, reuse, recycle. So your point's well taken that reuse is good, but I feel compelled to mention the life cycle analysis and environmental impacts that we're learning that, you know, the coffee can that can be made into another, you know, metal item may have a greater, or does actually have a greater impact on the environment than coffee delivered in the freeze-dried type pouch. So that, and the pouch would go to the landfill and not happen to be made into anything else. So this takes some real thinking, and the producers really are the ones that, you know, have the power to change. So I just wanted to note that we are learning to think more broadly. And just as this conversation is showing, Vinod's absolutely right. You know, 2.5 years, a lot of work went into this that Tom very well covered in a short amount of time. I'm impressed. But it gets complicated when you start peeling back the layers.
Yeah, I was going to mention the LCA. I mean, that's there's a lot of that packaging that DEQ talked a lot about that you're better off throwing that away because your carbon is so much less produced. It's all happening in the production. You know, I actually saw that, Tom. You probably saw the AOR milk dispenser thing today. They talked about you know, they saved so much milk that it was that the creation of milk was the real savings. The not losing them in the cartons. It wasn't that when they were getting rid of cartons. It was that they were producing less and losing less. But there's a lot of moving pieces. Yeah.
Yep, putting the cartons in the garbage wasn't as much of an environmental impact as creating milk that wasn't being consumed.
Absolutely.
I had a question on the definition of a manufacturer. Like, would Amazon in this case be considered a manufacturer, or are they just reselling? And would they be held to anything?
I think they're just reselling. Is that right, Vinod, you'd say?
Yeah, that's my understanding. It's like you said, it's your Unilevers, your Dow, your Nabisco, your PepsiCo, the people that are producing the packages, and then it can put it. So we wouldn't tax Fred Meyer. It's higher upstream.
And there'd be no restrictions on like how they package their things that they send to you, or tax.
That's a whole separate battle, right?
That's a different. That's not covered under this at all.
I don't think so.
Yeah, not the repackaging. Not that they take it and put it in a bigger box and anything. Yeah, it's more about what the container is being made, and so.
I want to mention one other thing just for people to be aware of is how slowly this moves. But I got crossways with the insurance industry about aviation insurance and talked to the state insurance commissioner. And he basically said, hey, I agree with you completely, but Oregon is such a small state that, at least in the insurance market, there just won't be anybody running insurance in Oregon. If we put in too draconian a set of rules, they'll just pull out, you know, as long as they have California, Texas, and New York. The rest of it is just sort of gravy for them. And so the reality is that, you know, we can help other states move forward and push on this kind of thing. But little old Oregon is not going to be in a position to say, you know, you can't import anything if it's made this way or anything else. But we have to realize that we're a pretty small flea on the side of the dog, and we can cause some annoyance, but not much more than that.
Yeah, so that was brought up there are national things going on in California, and then we're doing it. You know, we talked about the labeling that was concerned, like how's Oregon going to move that? But the producers hear it coming. They've started to release information like, hey, here's a plan that we think could work too. So that the dialogue's coming, and we're in the forefront of it. So
yeah, and I think we can push real hard and make an impact, but I don't think we can force anybody to do much of anything.
But California's, you know, what, the 7th
Oh yeah,
largest
they
GDP,
can.
so yeah.
But politics in California make Oregon look like a country meeting, county fair kind of a thing. Politics in Oregon, in California, is a little more cutthroat and vicious. Okay, back to our agenda. Any oral communication? Kathy Folsom, is anybody's?
Doesn't look like it.
Doesn't look like it. Okay, anybody on the committee have anything they want to bring up? That said, I move we adjourn. Thank you
everybody.
everyone for coming. We'll see you next month.
All right.
See
Have a
you
good
in
one.
November.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, Tom.
Congratulations
Congrats.
again, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah, congrats, Tom.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for attending. Just as a reminder, this recording will be posted on the solid waste page of Washington County's website. It'll be posted within 1 week's time. We will also be including some supplemental notes as we didn't quite hit record right at the beginning of the session. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thanks everyone. You have a good evening.